All right, so our last video for this module here is on workplace violence. Okay, so part of the good stuff, right? Look at this: 18,000 people were killed at work in violence that was work-related, and since 2019, there's been a apparent major uptick. I don't know if it's an actual uptick in violence or if it's an uptick in the reporting of the violence, but there's been a huge uptick in recent years. More than 2 million American workers self-reported. They have been victims of attacks. 6 million threatened. Workplace violence really became a prominent thing back in 1986 when there was a postal worker that had been recently terminated. And he came in and he shot 14 co-workers and then himself. And so there was a phrase that was relatively common at that point, and it was called going postal. Going postal was a phrase which represented somewhat random violence. So what are the risk factors for violence in the workplace? Having contact with the public. Oh my God, you can't go 5 minutes without seeing a video of, a conflict at a McDonald's between a customer and, a worker or something. He just can't help it. Exchange of money can absolutely increase risks. Delivery of passengers, goods, and services. Okay? Having a mobile workplace, right? Having a van or something that you work out of. Okay? Working with unstable people. Working alone. In other words, everything is a risk factor for violence, okay? Most of the violence in the workplace does not come from the workers themselves, but from outsiders such as customers, okay? So, what are some of the factors that might predict or, make the risk much higher, all right? Mishandled termination. And again, it's about perception. If an employee perceives that they have been unfairly terminated, the truth of the matter isn't all that important, okay? Bringing weapons onto the work site. Absolutely, I don't see why weapons should be on a work site. Drug or alcohol use on the job. Yeah, people that are doing drugs or alcohol on the job have already had reduced inhibitions, obviously. Holding a grudge over a potential real or imagined grievance. Oh my God, hypersensitivity to criticism. I like that. Fascination with weapons. Oof. Obsession with and a grievance. Okay? So there's clearly predictors or risk factors here. And I mean, you might even put school violence right here too, and pretty much have much the same side over here. Okay? So here's the profile of a dangerous employee. What does a dangerous employee look like? A white male between 20 and 60. Interesting. A social isolate, experienced a triggering event, and again, triggering event is perceptions, okay? The dangerous employee is often aggressive and intimidating, exhibit bizarre or unusual behaviors, okay? They will have one of these, like either a history of violence, a severe disorder, chemical dependence, so one of these will be present as well in most situations. So we find that organizational violence is a complex thing, as all things are, and there's lots of factors that are influencing workplace. And so you have, for example, individual characteristics, obsession with weapons, etc. Organizational environmental characteristics. That is frequent contact with customers that are kind of annoying, okay? And so these will sort of influence each other, but at the same time, they will influence organizational motivated aggression. And this is almost sort of like intentions, this is attitudes of some sort, sort of. And then these intentions or something will lead to the actual violence. But what happens is the organizational reaction to the earlier type things here will influence how it turns into the violent side. Meanwhile, when the violence does happen, how does the organization respond? And the response from the organization feeds back into the first two parts of the model. Okay? Frustration aggression hypothesis. It's a little bit simplistic, but the idea is that many emotions exist on a degree of intensity. That is, I am contented, I am happy, I am ecstatic. Right? It's essentially 3 degrees of the same emotion. Right? Contented, happy, ecstatic. Okay? And so the idea is that frustration is one of the degrees of aggression of sorts. Now, that's not quite right, but it's in the ballpark of the idea. And so the idea is that there will be constraints. That is to say, you want to accomplish a task. You have a goal in mind. You are trying to accomplish a goal, and somebody throws a roadblock up in front of you. That's a constraint, okay? Something that blocks you from achieving your goal. When a constraint is placed in front of you, you will feel frustration. If you feel frustration and you have no control over the constraint, you will often have destructive behavior to destroy the obstacle in front of you. But if you feel frustration and you have the ability to deal with the constraint, it can lead to a constructive response. The justice hypothesis of workplace violence is, and we've been hinting at the idea all along, is that the violence is sometimes seen as justified by the perpetrator of the act because they were treated unfairly, therefore the violence is justified. So it's a balancing act, right? It's an equity theory, it's that kind of a thing. And so workers will evaluate the workplace in 3 ways. Procedural justice, right? That is, am I treated equally? Distributive justice. Do I deserve the things that I've gotten? And interpersonal justice. Am I treated respectfully? Okay? So 3 different ways that a worker will perceive their organization as fair or unfair. Okay? And a more recent trend, and again, I say more recent simply because I'm a little bit older than most of you. So bullying was not a topic of conversation in the 80s and 90s. Nobody talked about bullying, but now we talk about bullying. Okay? So bullying, harassing, offending, socially excluding, or assigning humiliating tasks to a subordinate status repeatedly, etc. Okay? So depending on who you ask, 25% of people say that they've experienced bullying. If you cover, instead of saying in the last year, have you experienced, instead in the last 5 years, then all of a sudden 50% respond that they have. Okay? In the United States, we have stricter laws to protect against bullying behavior in the workplace than they do in Europe. And so what you find is that you get different types of bullying in America versus Europe. Okay? Bullying is the same whether you're in white-collar or blue-collar positions. So workplace bullying definitely needs to be monitored, and absolutely, it's part of those compliance training, the trainings we talked about. So every year I have to go through a series of training videos. I don't remember, but I have done the bullying training at some point. I don't remember when, but every couple of years that one comes up. Okay. So there ought to be training, coaching, right? We find that what happens is there ought to be a plan in place for how to address it before it happens, okay? You ought not be trying to react to it after it happens. And it's, here, active shooter training isn't really on the line with bullying, but absolutely we need to know that active shooter training has become a fairly common thing in schools and in industry. Okay? So, the PSYOPs top 10 trends. I don't know, dog found something. The PSYOP top 10 trends, here's number 9. What is the employer's role in an employee's mental health? Because, by definition, that is to say by the HIPAA laws, right? The Health Information Protection Act or something. An employer has no business having any knowledge of your mental or physical health. That is not their business. They are not legally allowed to ask. But what role should they play? Okay? And it is kind of an interesting thing that a lot of the more recent trends is not waiting until an employee has a mental illness and then address it. Instead, let's look at the situations that are relating to mental problems and eliminate them. Okay, so it's kind of a different role more recently. All right, so that's it for Unit 4. So you better be getting out there and studying for your exam pretty soon.